Okay, good evening, everybody. It's a little bit after 8:30 p.m. on the 2nd of June, 2020, and this is a special summer session, a kind of open continuation of my course for the spring term.
Can you mute?
Yeah, some people are having noise in the background. Can you mute that?
The benefits of us having a Jewish defense minister outweigh the risk.
Josie, can you mute? I think it's you that has the interference.
Coordinate the attack in a way that keeps them clear of suspicion.
Okay, so this is a continuation of one of my courses. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to set it up so I'll mute everybody, which I think I know how to do. Mute all. And I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself, and that way we'll have less feedback. So this is a continuation of a course. Frank, do you want to say anything about my film course in like 10 words or less?
It was great in the sense of cultural competence, being exposed to different ways that people do things in other parts of the world, and pretty eye-opening. Great experience. I really think that even if you just drop in every once in a while, totally worth it.
So we had a course, and Mimi was in the course as well, where we saw, I think, 14 films. And after we did Zoom, we adopted the, I tried to do it otherwise, but we had a system in which I would actually, since it was a course and I wanted to only do films that we could watch and then immediately discuss. So I'd have a classroom section, I would designate a film, it would be available either for free on YouTube or for, I think the most expensive one was $6. Although the ones in Netflix, you had to like join Netflix, which I think we had 100% participation in Netflix anyway. And then we would convene after the film was over to have a discussion. I found that the system worked pretty well. And then for the summer, it allowed me, once we had the system, to say, well, let's look at some of the series that people are talking about. Invite everybody. And the co-sponsors of this include the Kavod on the Road. You could say Kavod not on the road because I sent it to that list. The Colorado Hebrew Chorale, and I put down Laramie Jewish Community Center and the Hillel at UW and all these other people. But basically, that's just who I sent the list to. And I'm happy to do it, and I'm happy to catch up on some of my own viewing. I figured that's enough of an introduction. And does anybody want to say anything at this point? I'll just welcome everybody. Barbara, I haven't welcomed you by name yet. Let's see, anybody else? Bonnie, it's good to see you. And Art, I think I welcome everybody else by name. Cliff, good to see you. Okay, well, I'm going to start by playing a musical clip. You guys will have to tell me immediately if it doesn't work. This is a clip not from the film that I asked you to see, but from an Israeli three-part documentary that Frank helped me locate. Frank suggested that the only way that I would be able to see this would be through a VPN, recommended something called TourGuard. TourGuard, in fact, was able to give me 2 locations in Israel, one in Tel Aviv and one in Jerusalem. And I have to say, Frank, it worked well, except I needed both. Sometimes the Tel Aviv place shut me out, sometimes the Jerusalem place shut me out. But I could see almost all 3. I just ran out of time for the last one that I viewed. But I'm going to show a musical clip from one of them, and I'm going to start with that as a background to the discussion. And I did this with a screen recorder that I really don't know how to use all that well. So let me share the screen, and hopefully it will work real well.
השתוללו רק קו של גבול עובר בינינו
Only the border separates us. They're over there and we're here.
אבל
And this is an image of his daughter in the documentary. And the first image we saw very briefly was his widow when she was a lot younger than she is today. That's Nadja Cohen, looking actually very much like the Nadja Cohen, the actress. The documentary also has the Nadja Cohen of today. Let me see if I can get rid of this. First of all, I just want to check. Did you all see the screenshot? Yeah, okay, good.
Yes.
Does anybody want to open up our discussion anyway about the TV series, The Spy?
I'll just start. I hadn't. I wish I would have set it up before. I bought a surround sound system with a subwoofer and all that, and I didn't have it ready during the spring class. And I really wish I had, because I think I was missing out when I was watching The Spy with subwoofer and all that. The music was stellar. The sound was phenomenal, and it was a dimension that I was missing throughout the rest of the semester. So yeah, the music was really atmospheric in the series.
Okay, anybody else have anything you want to say?
Dr. Ward,
Yes.
I actually have the book. I've been having the book for many years, and I put it aside because on the back it shows him being hanged. And so I really never wanted to read it, but now I'm going to go back and read the book. And yeah, so I'm amazed. Thank you for allowing us to watch this film today.
Right, whatever. I'm giving you the opportunity. Norma, which book did you have? Do you have Our Man in Damascus or any of a number of other books?
I have Our Man in Damascus, Eli Cohen, by Eli bin Hanan.
Okay, there are a number of books about Eli Cohen. There's also the documentary. I'll show you the documentary if I can.
Okay.
I know I can. I just question is, will it come up as quickly as I like?
I thought it was interesting how they began the series with the ending, as if they wanted to let you know this is not a happy story or not a happy ending.
Right. I actually think they needed to do that in part because it was going to go on Netflix. I think every Israeli knows, the song that I played you, I'm almost certain that it was sung by Joe Amar. I didn't go back to read the credits at the end, which went by very quickly. Of course, I had it on the recording. I could have gone back, but I found the recording by Joe Amar of that song. And Yehoram Gaon has a different song remembering Eli Cohen. I think it's interesting that the name is Eli Eli, very famous. There is, I think everybody in the Jewish world knows, I should say the Israeli side of the Jewish world knows Eli Eli by Hannah Senesh. Does anybody know the famous musical role of the Yiddish version of Eli Eli? This is a bit of trivia. A very important American film career was sparked by not the Hannah Senesh Eli Eli, but the Yiddish Eli Eli. No one has any idea? Well, as long as I'm not sharing the screen, I'm going to look for a silly hint. Because we can, because I don't remember everything. Here's a clue. This song catapulted a young singer named Francis Gumm into the American musical theater spotlight. Okay, well, Francis Gumm was in a sister act. Daryl Zanuck interviewed her, She asked what song she should sing, and he said Ailey Ailey. Loved it. Gave her the new name Judy Garland. Not the most famous person to have sung, not the only famous person to have sung Ailey Ailey, but certainly it is of interest. Ivan, I don't know if you remember our classmate in my history class. He played Ailey Ailey, the Chanasenish piece, but he talked about the other Ailey Ailey, which was a Yiddish piece from about 60 years before. And he actually even had a discussion about the guy who wrote it and so on. Again, he had a clarinet, if you remember. He played the wrong song. But the name there is quite interesting. Anybody else have anything you want to say to get us started, besides that the music is greater in surround sound than it would be just coming out of a laptop? Jerome.
Well, I'm not very familiar with Israeli film and television. I was really surprised at how sympathetic the Syrian characters are portrayed. Particularly Al-Hafez.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, he really anguishes over Camille. And he really cares. And yeah, we see a range of people on the Syrian side. We see the orgies, we see the decadence. But we also see the people that Eli Cohen emotionally wounds through his betrayals. And in some ways, the Israelis are not nearly as sympathetic. His handler, yeah, he's tortured. He goes back and forth. But in the end, he does his job. He sends Ellie back. The head of Mossad is just cold-hearted. He doesn't care who dies. So in some ways, it's quite a surprising. It points at failures at both sides, but it's really quite critical of Mossad and the Israeli government in some ways.
Anybody else want to talk about the critical images or the difference in the way they portray the Syrians and the Israelis?
I just want to add, I think that's the life of the Mossad. You know, the people that decide, to take those roles. I think it's a total sacrifice. I mean, they're willing to sacrifice their entire life for it. Anything I've seen, I've gotten that feeling, but I might be wrong.
I kind of got the same thing too, like right at the very beginning of the thing. Ellie is told, like, you have to be willing to lie to everybody if you're really going to be patriotic. And he still is kind of not accepting of that, I think, as he goes on. Still kind of folds on to who he used to be.
Okay, anybody else?
I think that Middle Eastern people, they don't have to be Jewish, but they're really very emotional, and they're very gracious in their hospitality. So it didn't surprise me that as Syrians, they were friends and they were very gracious to each other, and until they weren't. But the Mossad had a goal, and it was a business. It wasn't as social. So the Mossad acts the way they do because that's part of the business. But in the meantime, his handler was very empathetic towards his wife, more so than I would have expected. And maybe that's the way it really is. I don't know.
Anybody else have anything you want to say?
Yeah, I'll say for me, it's kind of a reality check that for those who are not in it, which is probably most of us, certainly me, those of us who are not in that part of defending our nations, we can take for granted that we can have these nice lives where we're friendly with people and we're sympathetic to our neighbors. And part of the reason we're able to do that is because there are those out there who are able to put their humanity aside and realize what's the job that needs to be done for the greater good.
Okay, anybody else have something you want to say?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how the last time he went home, he really had a very hard time becoming Ellie again. His camel personality kept on coming out, and he'd slip up. He'd slip up with Nadia. He slipped up in the department store. So I mean, I thought the actor playing him did a really good job of showing the tension that must be inherent in living that kind of double life, and not just any double life, a double life where you make a few missteps and it gets you killed.
Have anything to say about the actor? This is not exactly an unknown, non-marquee name.
Yeah, I'll say I was very pleasantly surprised with his ability to take on a role like this. In his past roles, I see the humor, but it didn't really appeal to me. But seeing him in this role is a testament to his talent as an actor.
I agree. I think he was outstanding, and I think we always relate to him as a comedian. But boy, oh boy, he played this role way beyond what I would have ever expected. And I mean, even when you felt he was weakening, he got stronger. Every time you thought, oh, maybe, he's going to take 10 steps backwards, he'd get stronger. And boy, did he showed that in his acting.
Dr. Ward, I was really impressed by his acting as well, but I also saw such a humility in the beginning, especially when he took his wife to the party and he was addressed as possibly like the butler, and
Right.
but he really showed so much humility, and I really appreciated that. But the one comment that I was surprised about was when they got home, he mentioned that they were the brown people, and that they were possibly unliked because of the brown people. They were the brown people. So I was amazed at the color lines there.
Okay, anybody else?
I wanted to follow up on what Clifford said and also what Danny said. I agree with Clifford. I think the story is its most interesting when it gets into the psychology of the characters and how they deal with the reality of their world, and for Ellie Cohen not being able to, his two identities beginning to blur, one taking over the other. I thought that was the most interesting part. And I think I'm blanking on what you said, Danny, but it makes me, I keep asking myself, what is this story really about? What is the filmmaker trying to tell us? And in a weird way, it kind of, maybe it speaks to Jews outside of Israel more than it does Jews in Israel, because we struggle with that identity, right? Who are we when we go into mainstream America versus our homes or the synagogue, right? Our identities and our profession and the pressure to hide who we are as Jews. And I hadn't seen that before until what Danny said, and now I'm starting to think that in some ways it's really a discussion about Jewish identity, not necessarily Jewish identity in the world, not necessarily just Israeli. So.
Well, I think in Israel there is a prejudice between the Ashkenazi Jew and the Sephardic Jew. So this is why they called them brown people. That's like when she said brown. There is a prejudice. Many of the Sephardim years ago, I remember just being there, and those were the people that were the maids, the cooks, just as we had here. I don't know if it still exists today. I don't know if there's an Israeli online here, but that's what I assumed that she was talking about. Because, and he said, you know, he's from Egypt. You know, he's a lower class than the Ashkenazi that came over to Israel, or what the Ashkenazi thinks they are.
Well, I'm going to pull out Art before I go ahead. Art. Unmute. Art, you have to unmute. Okay, Art.
Okay. Now, some years ago, there was a film in Israel called Casablanca, with Yaron Gaon. And it,
Yeah, you can see it over here.
What?
You can see it on my background.
Oh, okay, good. But the subject of the film was how the Sephardics, especially the ones from Morocco, were looked down upon. He was called Casablanca, which was a lower class thing because he was from Casablanca. So it showed that there was a class system in Israel.
Casablanca is a very important film, I think, in many, many ways, one of the most important Israeli films of that period. It really isn't a Berekas film, but there was a whole genre that's always called Berekas. Art, you probably know what Berekas are.
Yes, they're also called empanadas in Argentina, right. And I buy them regularly from the local Argentine bakery.
Yeah, so they were called Berekas films. I want to talk a little bit about that issue in the series and in the documentary that I saw. The documentary actually had some documentation of Eli Cohen and actually some of the other people who had Arabic backgrounds in Israel, Jews who'd come from Arabic-speaking countries, or even were still in Arabic-speaking countries, who were that much more enthusiastic about serving the Israeli state because they did not have the experiences. They were not in the Independence War. They were not Holocaust survivors. And they felt that this was a way that they could build up the bona fides to be real Israelis. There was another scene that Norma, you would have also wanted to say this is part of the dialogue of the discourse of color. Nadia Cohen has a job as an assistant to a very wealthy Ashkenazi lady. And every once in a while, the filmmakers have some of the back and forth between them as reflecting the fact that she was Iraqi. Nadia Cohen herself was Iraqi, and they had a marriage that was Iraqi style. And her brother is Sami Mikhail, an important Iraqi Israeli author, not mentioned anywhere other than in the Wikipedia article that I looked at. But there was also that part of the discourse as well. The people running Mossad, they always looked like they were Ashkenazim, in case you're interested in this discourse and how it was reflected in the series.
Thank you.
Can you hear me, Seth?
Yes.
This is Sophie. As you know, hi. My mother was from Baghdad, her family, and some of the family went to the Far East, which she did, but then some went to Israel, of course. And there were stories that when the Iraqis, Jews, came to Israel, they were dressed very, very well. They were professionals and doctors and lawyers and all this. And that when they got into Israel, they were greeted with being sprayed with disinfectant. And then they were put in tents, you know, not very good living situations at all. And they've had to fight their way, you know, to get some kind of status. And that is very true that this is going on in the society, what we've been talking about. And the other interesting thing is that I asked my mother, because Arab Jew, I didn't understand that. And she said, I said, well, Mom, what were you, Jewish or Arab? And she said, well, we were Arabs who just happened to be Jews. And that's how they saw themselves in the Middle East there. They'd been there for so many centuries and so long that they really assimilated into the Arabic society somewhat and got along very well with their Arab neighbors. You know, so that's all I wanted to add that.
Well, I'm going to mention one thing. On June 1st and 2nd, this year, a week after the Jewish holiday of Shavuot, this is the anniversary of the Farhud, the riots by the non-Jewish population, the Muslim Arab population during the 1942, sparked probably by Nazi propaganda and by Rashid al-Dailani, who was the de facto ruler of Iran at the time. In terms of Holocaust numbers, the number of Jews who were killed was not particularly high, but in Baghdad, nothing like that had ever happened. I think some people say the numbers were in the 200s, but as it was in Kristallnacht in Germany, there were buildings that were trashed and windows that were smashed.
Yeah.
And it is something that we should remember.
Yes, that's
class,
true. But
Josie, go on.
I just want to add one thing, that when Israel became a state, that's when things really changed for the Jews in Baghdad, I was told. That's when the Arabs started to really go against the Jews and persecute them and do all these things that weren't so good. And that's when a lot of them left. That's why a lot of my family left, because of Arab persecution that was starting up once Israel became a state.
Well, it is a complicated story. There actually are filmic representations, some of which are, I think, reasonably truthful, some of which are very, very pointed, either pro or anti-Israel. If you lived in Baghdad during the time of the Farhud, this was well before the State of Israel in 1942. And I don't know that there was much anti-Jewish agitation prior to the Farhud in Iraq. But it's more complicated, I think, than simply saying when the State of Israel was declared, the Iraqis persecuted the Jews, although there is some of that. One of our neighbors here, some of the Denverites probably know Dr. Kazaz and the late Louise Kazaz. Louise was one of the first people to leave Iraq in 1949, 1950, when it became possible. And many Iraqis left at that time. I bring my students when I can to the Iraqi Heritage Center in near Tel Aviv. And there are lots of Iraqis who only were able to escape after Saddam Hussein came to power, in effect in the 1960s, and hanged 9 or so odd Jews in the downtown Baghdad. And after that time, everybody who could left very, very quickly.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I need to know more history. Now, the Farhud was in the 1920s, you said?
No, during World War II.
World War II. Okay. All right. And what does that mean? What does that word mean?
Well, Farhud basically means, you know, the pogrom, the action against the Jews.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I want to address very briefly some of the questions you might have or some of the issues you might be interested in about the historicity of the series. Does anybody care about what is historic and what was not historic in the film? Lori.
Yes, thank you, Seth. I want to ask you, because you can read, of course, Arabic. So I presume, look, we've seen his garment before because he's not an unknown entity to me. But with respect to the newspapers, was the frontage of the newspapers they were all reading, was that actually, I presume it's correct?
Well, it was in Arabic. I did not go to the library to see if I could reconstruct the exact page to see whether the page was exact or not.
Because they were all reading it, right? They were reading, not the Israelis, but in Syria, they were all reading this, right? Mm-hmm.
Well, it was Arabic language newspapers. It is Hollywood. Or I should say, I actually don't think it was Hollywood, but with Sacha Cohen, I'm sure they had plenty of money to make these things as accurate as they could where it was necessary. I did not check to see how accurate it was. One of the things that I know was an issue was getting the Syrian newspapers into Israel. It wasn't always so easy, and the fact that the character is depicted as sending newspapers to Israel is not unimportant, but I was unable to check because I know when I was teaching in Haifa in the 1990s, all sorts of books that, you know, they were from booksellers that Israel had no way of getting to directly, but the library said, we have our agents in Europe. This is not a problem. I don't know whether that was the case in the early 1960s.
What is the difference between, you mentioned the documentary and this film?
Okay, well, let me see if I can show you the documentary. There are a number of places. I have the share screen up.
Seth,
Yes.
while you're getting that, you mentioned David Kazaz. I'll share this when you're done.
No, go ahead. What about David?
I have the book, his book sitting here.
Right,
It's
the Mother of the Pound.
Mother of the Pound, yeah. So, I mean, I can share it with everybody, but if people are interested in looking more into the Iraqi Jews, I think he paints a good picture of what life was.
Well, it's a memoir with all of the pluses and minuses of the memoir. He actually was not in Baghdad during the Farhud. He was in medical school already.
Exactly.
But his wife was there, Louise was there, and his whole family was there.
And he kept communicating with her.
And he was communicating with everybody. And so he gives a pretty good idea. This is eliecohn.org.il. And I had it up because I looked for the Joe Amar song, but I couldn't find it here. But this is a place that has Camel Sabbath with a picture over here. This is the Yehoram Gaon song, a different song than the one I played for you. This is a picture of the historic Eli Cohen. This is what Najee Cohen looks like today. I'm just going to play a little bit of Yehoram Gaon. If you remember Casablanca, Gaon has gotten a lot older. And I saw something for Yom Yerushalayim that one of the online TV shows was playing a tape that Yehoram Gaon did in August of 2019. And, you know, the guy is, what, 80 years old? I was just bowled over by how good an entertainer he was. So I'll play just a little bit of it. Can you hear it?
זה הילד ממצרים ורחי טהור, זה הנער והגבר ששאף לאור, נע ונד חצה ימים ומדברים של חול, אבל בארצו שלו דבק יותר מכל.
In any case, you can play the rest of this if you want. There are other videos here, and some of them may even have English subtitles. I haven't looked at all of them. But what I wanted to go to, there is So this one is elicohn.org.il. And then if you know Hebrew, there are no subtitles in English. So it's only really good if you know Hebrew, but it has all the documentaries that I could find. This one is called Fighters 566. That's the one that I referred to. Thanks to Frank's advice, I was able to say all of them, all three series. I had to skip a little bit in the second one because I had to go to a different VPN. And then there are quite a few others. Here's The Impossible Spy, a trailer. So you can compare an awful lot of these things. I'm going to talk a little, and here's another one, Mossad Spy, Eli Cohn. I think this one has English subtitles. You see that there's also a reference in Russian, but I think that those things are available in English. I'm going to unshare, and I'll talk a little bit about the historicity. So we mentioned Amin al-Hafid. He was very much historic, and it is very hard to forget the chain of events in Syria after looking at the series. In the 1960s with the Ba'ath Party, and the Ba'ath Party was set up already in the 40s. The party was set up by two very, very secular Syrians, a Christian and a Muslim, and it was in fact responsible for secret meetings in 1962 and for toppling the government in 1963. And Amin al-Hafid very much became I think first he was the power, he was the person who was put in power by the Ba'ath Party, and then officially the president. Now he had been in Argentina, as far as I can tell, and I make no claims to be the final expert on these things. Amin al-Hafid denied having known Eli Cohn in Argentina. There are people who say for sure he knew them and gave evidence and so on, knew him. They knew each other, but he was toppled in 1965, but he was put under house arrest and then exiled and was allowed to come back into Syria, and I think in the late 1960s or 1970s, and was able to make recordings about the thing later on. So Fighter 566, which was his actual number, not the number in the Sacha Baron Cohen series. And as I said, Amin al-Hafid denies that he knew him in Argentina. I've seen a report that he denied that his wife was particularly friendly with Eli Cohn. I've also seen reports that Eli Cohn flirted back with Mrs. al-Hafid as well, maybe or maybe not to the extent that was shown in the film. I also saw a report saying that Amin al-Hafid did not attend the execution. Some of the other people who were depicted did not attend the execution. The fellow who helped Eli Cohn get across the border from Syria into Lebanon, he is historic. His name is Majid Abul. I have this written up elsewhere in my house. Majid Sheikh. This is why I always say it's not my age, although when I was younger, I didn't get worried about it. And this we'll find out very quickly. Majid Sheikh al-Ard was his name. And he's historic. And in fact, the pictures of him historically look a lot like the actor, or the actor was able to, do a good job of acting. Had a Jewish wife, was very impressed. And in fact, he turns out to have been a CIA agent in real life, something that was not covered in the film. You have to make choices, even in a film if it's only 6 sessions long. Like many other people who were in fact friends of Eli Cohn, he was in trouble and interrogated by the Syrian secret police. and he committed suicide in prison. I was not able to figure out the young guy, what happened to, whether he was able to survive interrogation, but he's also historic. And there are pictures of him. I think his name is Maazi Zahar al-Din. And he did in fact take a tour with Eli Cohen multiple times to the Golan, and his uncle was in fact a general. The film depicts the general being toppled in the coup in 1963. I was not able to determine whether he was killed or not. But the coup certainly took down the old regime and put in Ba'ath people instead. But he's also historic. He was also rounded up and imprisoned and interrogated. I just was not able to find out whether he survived. Certainly the idea of having parties, that was well documented. The Fighter 566 had somebody who claimed that the apartment that Eli Cohen had was somewhat austere for a man who was supposedly had all the money that he had and was throwing the money around. So we have that as being historic. The question of planting eucalyptus trees and the role that played in the Six-Day War, I could not find anybody who would confirm or deny. It was just one of these things that was considered to be an urban legend, and some people thought it was true. Some of the sources I looked at thought it was absolutely true, and some people just thought it was something that the Israelis like to say. On the other hand, Cohen did provide information that led to the Israelis knowing precisely where the bunkers were. He certainly met the father of Osama bin Laden. I don't know whether the young child Osama bin Laden came along with dad, as is depicted in the series. I think that's just, in case you didn't get it, the filmmakers wanted to say, here's the most infamous son of Mohammed bin Laden, right on your screen. But Mohammed bin Laden was in fact involved in the plan to divert the headwaters of the Jordan River, and brought heavy machinery to do that. So I don't know whether the details were correct down to the last moment, but that certainly is very important. And in fact, that and the intelligence about the very beginning of the Palestine Liberation Organization's movement, which was to help divert waters from the Jordan from reaching Israel, that also was historic. And it's quite likely, as far as, these are secret. The Mossad won't tell you everything that was sent by Eli Cohen, but it's likely that he was able to give some of the first indications of what the PLO was up to, as well as bin Laden. In terms of the ending of Eli Cohen's career, the film has, I would say, a single source theory. In other words, rather than raising multiple theories as to how Eli Cohen came undone, it has only one theory. Theory is people noticed that there was interference with radio transmissions, and they got the latest equipment to see if they could see where the transmissions were coming from. Historically, they probably got it from the Russians. And they went around and they were able to locate it, and they were able to come in and catch Cohen in the act of transmitting. I don't know that that's how it happened. I know that there are multiple theories about how Cohen's career came to an end. Certainly the documentary, the 566 documentary, suggests that it would have been unlikely that he was transmitting at night when there was less in the airwaves, and it would have been only during the daytime. And that the whole story is very unlikely. Much more likely. Hello, Jody, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
I got distracted. I really didn't want to hear this. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us. Let's see. No, none of you are in my class that read about 6 migrations and how they impacted Jewish food, but a superb article, which I hope you're happy that we read it. Unfortunately, undergraduates at the University of Wyoming don't really have the background in Jewish history, or for that matter, many other things, to talk about the migrations in great detail, but I had a lot of fun reading and talking about it with them. And let's see, no one in this group is probably going to take my, well, many may be taking my Kabbalah course. They'll probably learn about the participant observer in the Kabbalah Center. I think the book is still in print, and we'll have them read that. Jody is a colleague of mine for many years in the Western Jewish Studies Association. So I was talking about the historicity of the discovery of Eli Cohen. The documentary 566, Lochem 566, raises a number of other possibilities. One possibility is that Cohen became undone simply because if you're active in the field for a while, slowly but surely people begin to doubt things. The Suedani character of the film is absolutely historic and is on record as having said that he doubted the credibility of Kamel Thabit from the very beginning. Another theory is that there was a mole in the Israeli CIA, the Israeli Mossad, or in some of the security security institutions, and that mole passed along information that could have been used to identify Eli Cohen. I learned a new word. You know, I didn't grow up in Israel. I didn't know a Havet Someh. I didn't know the animals and the flora and fauna. Hafarferet is a digger. That's a mole. So there was a mole. A more likely intelligence-based source was that Cohen had some sort of dealings with CIA agents. One of the people that was interviewed for the Lohem 566, the 566 fighter program, suggested that Cohen put somebody in Syria in touch with the CIA and said this is a very dangerous thing for a spy to do. And that either somebody in the CIA or maybe Russian intelligence passed along information to the Syrians that put them on to the fact that they should be looking for somebody. In any case, I don't think we know for sure how it is that Cohen was discovered by the Syrians, and the sequence in the film is one-sided, as it would be in this type of film. If it were a true documentary, you'd have talking heads debate the different approaches that there were. This one, I think, to be a TV series, basically had to give you one source, one narrative. Jody.
Is there, I know that archives are, is there any issue of archives being opened, or is this the type of thing that they never get opened?
I don't think that some of the archives will ever be opened. I was happy to have read the documentary, and that shaped, to have seen the documentary, and that shaped some of my responses. In the documentary, Cohen's brother, and to a certain extent his sister and his wife, and some of the other people, including his oldest daughter, Sophia, who remembers her father, but she was 4 years old when she saw him. But it shows their attempts to do research and has pictures of some of the archives that they went to try to get the information. But they also have how shall I call this? A generic boilerplate statement from the Mossad saying, of course, you have to understand, for an intelligence agency, some of our documents are never going to be revealed ever. Let's see, what else can I say? Naja Cohn and her daughter, Sophia, I wrote down her name and I cannot remember. I'm just sorry. I left the page elsewhere and I'm not going to walk up to get my note. But her daughter and a grandson from a different daughter and some of the other people were depicted in the documentary and also in news reports debating the film. On the whole, they were reasonably happy. On the other hand, they said it wasn't necessarily truthful in all the accounts. Mrs. Cohn talks about how she was devastated when her husband was hanged. Also, she talks about the Mossad having a handler that came and kept her company, which was depicted in the film, but she seems in the film to have been, how shall I put this, as ill at ease as the real Mrs. Cohn said in the documentary. But I think the handler is depicted as being a little bit more solicitous than she remembered him being when she is giving her recounting her memories. Does anybody have other questions about the historical nature? I can't tell you I'm the great expert.
I have one question. There was a scene towards the end where literally everybody's reading the very same newspaper. So just from like a political standpoint, I mean, was it like that there was like one state-sanctioned newspaper and that was it, or would it have actually been disseminated differently in different parts of the country, or?
This is in Syria or in Israel?
In Syria.
There could very well have been only one state-sanctioned newspaper. I actually did not, I mean, I saw the scene and I saw another version of the scene. What I think they did is they reenacted a scene that was, that may very well have been available in live footage. There was a recording of, there was the protocols which have been published of the trial of Eli Cohn, and there was some radio recording, and some of the documentary played some of the radio recording of the trial. The Syrians were very, very happy to have caught a Zionist spy and made an awful lot of hoopla about it. And there was an awful lot of, back in those days, they did not have what we have today. Everybody and his sister and brother have mobile phones and they record videos. But there was TV newsreel footage, and they may have been reenacting something that was on newsreel footage, because I remember seeing something that looked a lot like everybody reading the same paper. Yeah, Lori.
Thanks, Seth. I actually really found, as I watched the end of that, I mean, I understand like the years that he spent, but I felt that just watching this, I watched, of course, Impossible Spy, etc., read about him, but I felt that Israel's response, I'm not talking about Mossad, but I'm going, surely Israel's response was a bit impotent. Were there any strike backs for his, hanging? Did they do anything in retribution for that?
That is a good question. The typical way that I know, and Jody, I see you maybe making motions. You might have better ideas than I do.
I was going to say there's no way they had only one newspaper in Syria. Even though I can't tell you, because they're the Christians and they're the Muslims. They're very divided. I mean, not as much as Lebanon, but maybe not as many Christians. I'm sure there were so many newspapers back then. Every different group had its newspaper. But
I can't imagine they'd have
striking back. You know what? You've been caught with your pants down. Your spy has been caught. I'm not sure that when there was a Lavon affair in Egypt, and also it was a big blunder on Israel's part, I don't think they did a strike back, did they?
Yeah, actually, the documentary talked about Eli Cohn staying behind when his family went from Alexandria to Tel Aviv, and he was actually involved in some of the Israeli dirty tricks that came to be known as Esek Habish, the bad action, and the Lavon affair. They kept him free of some of the worst things so that he actually got out of it, but he was involved in that thing. The most important response to Eli Cohen was that they had an awful lot of intelligence, which was used not too much later in the Six-Day War. In 1966, you know, I'm telling you about my age. I was a young kid on the top of the Israeli side of the Yam Kinneret, and I saw something which was probably more common than I had been led to believe, you know? Boom, 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 boom. We could not really hear it, but we certainly saw 5 Syrian positions go up in red smoke on the mountains on the other side. And that was in 1966. The Israelis were using some of the intelligence that they had gathered. And in 1967, again, according to the Israeli story, they had a lot of very accurate information, which allowed them to know where to bomb the airfields, where to, where the security, Syrian security was, and so on and so forth. And a lot of people credit Eli Cohen's massive amount of information with that. I don't know that they attempted to do anything. I think anything that the Israelis would have done, such as bombing Syria, bombing Damascus, would have been counterproductive. I just don't think they saw that as wise. What they did do, apparently, and this is in the Baron Cohen film, they tried to get international support to have prisoner exchange. There was a feeling, according to the documentary, again, I don't know whether this was actually true, the documentary knew that Cohen had the goods on some of the people who were judges because they had been in his parties. And the Israelis apparently tried to make a deal that he wouldn't say anything about the judges and the judges would not execute him, but that's not how things happen. Cliff. Unmute.
Can you explain that again? Like they were torturing him. So what do you mean he could say anything about it? Can you explain that?
Yes, I will explain what I just said. Having seen the 566 documentary, read some of the material, and not being an expert in this particular period, you know, I'm sure we have colleagues who know this stuff cold and have done research and published books and articles about it. I have not. But a viewer who viewed the documentary might have come to the impression that Cohen had information about the judges, having gone to his parties, which he may have sent to the Israelis. And that one of the strategies that might have been used was to make a deal that they would not share the information about the judges being involved in body parties, and they would, whatever else they would do, they would not execute Cohen. I don't think that they made a big point of this, and I may be reading into what the film said, but again, you know, you asked what could they have done? There were these attempts through third parties, through the lawyer that is historic, and through other methods to try to do that type of stuff. But I don't think, I mean, Jody, I think you're right. Like, they were not able to just, you know, what Bibi does today, send some planes and, you know, just bomb the hell out of someplace in Syria. That's just, that was not, and there were Jews in Syria in those days. The movie talked about the chief rabbi of Damascus, a historic person, and, you know, meeting with him and taking a letter to his widow. And the letter survives. The letter was written in Arabic characters, and it was read in French translation in one of the video clips that I saw by Maurice, who was in fact historic, the brother who got a job basically receiving the dispatches from his brother and was able to determine that, you know, it was his brother. And that again is historic. Anyway, Cliff, you had a question you wanted to talk about.
It seems to me that the story moves very quickly from his arrest to his execution. And what I thought seemed strange is, would they have tried to plumb him for as much information as possible and tortured him before they executed him to, find out about what Israel was doing? There had to be more than what they showed, because they didn't show anything like that.
The simple answer to that is, as far as I can tell, yes. But I think they also wanted to execute him while, justice should be complete and swift, something like that. I think they wanted to make a big point of it, and not to say, well, we're going to hold you for years and years and years until nobody cares anymore. Okay, well, we've spent an hour or so.
I have a question.
Jody?
But didn't you see the very opening scene? All his fingernails? It was disgusting. It was really gross. They tortured him. Yeah. They made a point of showing that right in the very first scene. I thought, oh, I don't want to watch this whole thing, which I didn't.
They tortured him, and they hanged him in the public square with a demeaning placard over him. And that's historic also. And, what can I say? Dealing with, for example, the Islamic State people, who in the unfortunate way in which some modern torture has been doing in warfare, they cut people's heads off, and they do all sorts of things. As far as I can tell, they did traditional torture. The fingernails, they probably burned him, they probably did all sorts of things, they probably beat him. And he also was interrogated in open court as well as in private sessions. On the other hand, the clip that I saw of the newsreel showed them taking down the body and putting it in a box. And, sometimes they might have burned it or dismembered it or chopped it up and so on. And they didn't do that. There are still people who hope that the body can be repatriated. I don't know that would happen. As I said, it's about 9:30. I hope you guys had fun. I'll talk a little bit about what I want to do in the next little piece. No one has written me. There are people like Jerome who just said it's too late. No one has written me saying, please start at 7 o'clock or some other earlier time, Mountain Time. Thanks for Danny, who I think is in Eastern Time also. It's pretty late for you, but thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. Next week, we are going to look at the film or discuss the series Unorthodox, which is getting an awful lot of buzz these past couple of weeks. And, view it, see what you have to say about it. I know there are many people who read the memoir on which it's based before the film came out. And I have not. I like reading the memoirs after I see the film. If it works that way, that's just my choice. And the two things that I'm thinking about that I've made a decision about is, first of all, my wife has been after me to see Fauda, which I think is a very important series. I've seen a small number. I don't know if I'm going to binge watch everything from the beginning to end with her, but we'll see as many as I can. Danny is smiling. You've probably seen the whole thing from beginning to end.
I just saw the last episode today. It's one that it is hard to stop watching because they do a great job of giving you a cliffhanger at the end of almost every episode.
Right. So I want to have a discussion of Fauda, and Frank has also mentioned that, and a few other people have mentioned that. And one of my buddies suggested that I include very strange but very interesting and fun Israeli film called Maktub, which is on Netflix these days. Has anybody seen Maktub?
I started it. I don't know if I finished it.
Okay, well,
Can you
Hello?
spell it? Maktub.
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 It was a stranger one.
It is a strange film, but you know, it's sort of, it was fun. My Islamic and Arabic movie people have not shown up in large numbers tonight. I would like to maybe include one or two films from the Middle East outside of Israel. We'll see what they will be. You guys can send me your recommendations. Jody?
I'm wondering why you put unorthodox as an Israeli film.
Basically, because I'm happily married, Jody. The wife wanted me to discuss it. He's not going to show up for the conversation, but she said you ought to have the discussion. So you know that's why it's there.
Oh, okay.
The Star is an Israeli actor.
Israeli. Yeah.
And there is an awful lot of buzz about it. And, you know, actually, Frank also recommended that I do. Frank has been on my case to see more films that talk about Haredi and non-Haredi worlds. And there are quite a few of them that he's recommended, either series or whatnot. He was after me to see Shtisel for many weeks. And I saw the first two seasons. And there are others that he's been on me to watch. If you have recommendations, send them to me. I will try to make a decision 1 week in advance. The decision for next week is unorthodox. I also had to make a decision. I wanted to be something that I was relatively sure that many of the people in this circle had already seen. I know that Art and to a certain extent Josie and some of the other people on my list are interested in crypto Jews. And if you have a film you want to recommend, either about Sephardim in general or about crypto Judaism specifically, especially if it's Israel and Middle East, that's a good idea too. I'm going to ask you to write me by email your recommendations. I don't think there's anybody on this list who does not have my email. Send it to me. I will make a decision, but I'm interested in hearing your recommendations.
That other movie you mentioned for Fauda, or I didn't. What?
Fauda is a series. Dana, you've watched, how many years have you watched? How many seasons?
There's 3 seasons.
And what, about 15 or 20 each season, or less than that?
No, it's less than that. I think I think a dozen episodes each season.
Right. So you're looking at 30 some odd hours if you want to watch the whole thing. I don't know whether I'll be able to do that quickly, but I'll set up for some time, sometime in the series. My commitment, my goal is to do this every Tuesday night in June and July. That's my goal. I think there's enough films and enough interest, and a lot of us are still sort of less active than we might have been had our summer plans not been canceled and the camps not been closed and the university terms turned off, and so on and so forth. So I hope you enjoy that. Anybody else have anything you want to add, Jody?
I have a question about this movie. Just they drank wine in one of the scenes and other alcoholic stuff. So what were the views in Syria, like theocracy versus like more like like on the spectrum democracy? Because you see different outcomes. There's like the way Iran went was totally kind of different. You go to Lebanon, there's still like devout and religious people, but you kind of see that that there's like more emphasis. It's more like a macrocosm of Israel almost, you know what I mean? Like, so what, I mean, is it just like okay to openly do a lot of these things in Syria, or was it at the time?
This was back in the 1960s, and the Ba'ath Party was radically secularist. Absolutely secularist. And to this day, Bashar al-Assad and his family, these guys are Marxists. They're they're secularists. They're anti-religious. The religious tradition of the Alawis is anathema to the Iranians. The Iranians don't really care because the Al-Assad family are radically secularist Marxists. They're not at all religious. Had they been religious in the Alawi tradition, they'd be Trinitarians, Muhammad Ali and Salman al-Farisi, the kind of Holy Trinity. This is absolute shirk. This is no go from an Islamic point of view. But the fact that they are so very secular in the rule, that doesn't mean that that everybody in Syria is secular, but this particular crowd, drinking, doing things that are not Islamic, that's not a problem. Maybe eating in public during Ramadan would have been problematic. The Camel of Thabit character probably did not have to go to mosque to prove his bona fides. Not in Argentina and not in Damascus as a religious community, because it was not a religious community.
I have a question. So I was wrong before. There's not a lot of Christians in Syria, right?
Well, there are Christians in Syria. Syria was, how Syria came to be. The line was drawn, the French and the British argued about what would be, and Syria really, the Ottomans had a vilayet of Damascus.
Right.
The borders were not exactly what they are. The borders were not all that unusual. Lawrence of Arabia, who was very much against the partition, had a map that wasn't all that much different from the map that the British and the French came up with. But there's Jabal Duruz, there are Druzes, both east of where the Golan Heights is Syrian border are, and in the northeastern corner of the Israeli side of the Golan barrier. There are Christians. Syria was the first place that was proselytized by Christ Apostle, Paul on the road to Damascus and all that. There are still significant Syrian Christian populations and multiple different types. There were some Jews in those days in Aleppo and in Damascus. They had not all fled to Beirut in the 1960s. There aren't that many now. There were Jews also, and probably still some Jews in Syrian Kurdistan. The Alawis, Al-Assad's family is from Latakia, an area that the Russians are very interested in. That area is on the Mediterranean coast, and the Alawis are also religiously distinct. There are a number of other different groups. There are some Ahmadis, there are all sorts of people in Syria. Okay, yeah, Jody, any other questions?
Lila Tov.
Well, thank you, everybody. Join us next week.
Thank you.
Any final comments?
Thank you.
Thanks, bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Steph. That was a wonderful, wonderful discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good discussion. Thanks.
Danny, thanks for joining us. It's good to meet you.
Zygazum.
Thank you, Seth.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.